All right, welcome back. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this Civil War animated battle maps and just do a reaction on them. Um, it, I want to start doing this. It will probably take 4 years, definitely, to get it done because that's how long the war lasted, and we're just gonna go by each day that each battle was fought. Um, and um, So hopefully everybody enjoys it. Hopefully we all learn something from it. I'm not really. Um, there's several battles that they do have that I'm not really familiar with that I've seen. Of course, Fort Sumter is one of those that most people know of. But we'll go ahead and get into it without much further ado, and let's get this party going. Don't forget to please like and subscribe to the channel if you really like it, and leave a comment below. All right, let's go.
Even before the Civil War, the nation was divided, North and South. Slavery was at the heart of issues involving economics, politics, and sectional power. These issues boiled over in the halls of Congress, at Harper's Ferry, and elsewhere. The slave labor of the agricultural South was the fuel that drove the region's economy. The industrial North.
Now, I don't know what your guys' feeling is on John Brown. A lot of people, I'm sorry, they're not going to, looks like, go into detail about that, as it is only 7 minutes. But let me know your opinion about John Brown there in the comments. I have my own opinion. I think any kind of terrorist-like activity, even for good causes, is not acceptable by any means. But let me know your opinion down below.
North was driven by a manufacturing-based economy. This diversity helped fan the flames of secession at Harper's Ferry and elsewhere. The slave labor of the agricultural South was the fuel that drove the region's economy. The industrial North was driven by a manufacturing-based economy. This diversity helped fan the flames of secession and would have significant impact upon the coming war. The presidential election of 1860 proved to be the final spark that tore the country apart. Nominees Stephen Douglas and John C. Breckinridge represented the North and South respectively. The Constitutional Union Party sent John Bell as their candidate, with Abraham Lincoln as the Republican Party's nominee. Lincoln's anti-slavery.
So that was the main reason why Lincoln won, was because the Democrat Party basically split, and then into three different groups between Frederick Douglass, John Breckinridge, and John Bell. A lot of Northern Democrats who were not, probably most Northern Democrats went with Douglas, but John Bell took away some of those Northern Democrats that were, for pro-union Democrats, mainly I think from just one state, I think Kentucky or Tennessee or something like that. But John Breckinridge took most of the southern states. Stephen and Douglas took the northern Democrat states, and then Abraham Lincoln took the rest. But because they were so split up, Stephen A. Douglas lost many northern states to Abraham Lincoln because the votes just weren't there for him.
Reviews were seen by many Southerners as a direct threat to their way of life. Therefore, when Abraham Lincoln won the election of 1860, Southern states were outraged.
And mainly it was the main people who felt their way of life threatened. It wasn't your, poor Southern farmer. It wasn't your store clerk who didn't own any slaves. It was mainly the large plantation owners. And I think I mentioned this in one of my videos before, that those large plantation owners, they basically controlled the Southern Congress and the Southern state legislatures, I should say, both their senates and their houses of or their assemblies. state legislature, state Senate, state Congress, were all composed mostly of this planter class. So they felt that Lincoln was threatening their slaves, or that the North as a whole was threatening their slaves, but it was embodied through Lincoln. When what Lincoln and many of the others wanted, it wasn't necessarily the abolition of slavery in the southern states, but in order to stop the expansion of slavery. And I could go into a whole video showing how the founding fathers and that idea of limiting slavery to only a section of the country and not allowing it to spread throughout was a desire from the founding fathers all the way to Abraham Lincoln. And at first, many southern states, especially like Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, the middle slave states, a lot of people in those slave states were all for not expanding slavery any further, but just leaving it in the South. And of course, part of that strategy is to limit the power of slave states in Congress, for the main reason to be able to one day write an amendment eliminating slavery altogether. But anyway, all that leads to this part where a lot of the Southerners, Southern plantation owners, see that their days of having slaves are being numbered, and that's why they secede. One of the reasons.
On December 20th, 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union. 6 other states soon followed, forming the Confederate States of America. With the Union dissolved, civil war was inevitable.
So like he said, only 7 states seceded, and at the end of it all, there were 11. So there's 4 states who don't secede at this time, which are Tennessee, Arkansas, Virginia, and North Carolina.
By March 1861, nearly all the forts and naval yards in the Second States had been seized by the new government. Charleston Harbor was among a handful of coastal strongholds that remained in federal possession. When South Carolina seceded from the Union, there were 3 U.S. fortifications in Charleston Harbor.
What's crazy is that there was the Secretary of War at this time, while all these states are seceding. The Secretary of War of the United States was a Southern Democrat, and he started to actually move stockpiles of weapons from these federal forts into the hands of these southern states. And so basically, he was a traitor while he was doing all that. All right.
Castle Pinckney was built in 1810 to provide for inner harbor defense. By 1860, it was in need of major repair, and its garrison consisted of only 2 people, a widowed sergeant and his teenage daughter. Fort Moultrie, first built in 1776, with succeeding forts built on the same site, was completed in 1809. With 50 cannon mounted, it served as the major fortification to defend Charleston Harbor until the beginning of the war. Fort Sumter was an imposing sight. Sitting on a man-made island, the brick fort was 90% complete in 1860 and the most defensible fortification in Charleston Harbor. In November...
Okay, did he say that it was finally built in 1860? So it was... that was a really new fort, while Fort Moultrie and Castle Pinckney were pretty old.
1860, Major Robert Anderson assumed command of U.S. fortifications in Charleston Harbor, headquartered at Fort Moultrie. Soon after...
So he was a Kentuckian. He was one of the main reasons why Kentucky stayed in the Union, because of his drive and his popularity in Kentucky, and people knew about him.
After South Carolina seceded, Major Anderson moved his command of 85 officers and men to Fort Sumter under cover of darkness. Fort Sumter was the safest and most defensible position he could hold against attack with a limited number of men and supplies at hand. Charlestonians were outraged, and within a few days, South Carolina militia had seized all federal property in the area except Fort.
So, on December 20th, South Carolina secedes, and on December 24th, he does this change. So he barely got out of there.
Sumter. They occupied Castle Pinckney and seized Fort Moultrie. In defiance of the federal presence in Charleston Harbor, the Southerners rebuilt batteries and constructed new fortifications on Sullivan's Island, on Morris Island, and on James Island. When Anderson and his troops first entered Fort Sumter, the fort was far from complete. For 3 months, Anderson prepared Fort Sumter for combat. By April 12th, however, fewer than half the needed cannon were ready, and even these lacked soldiers to man them.
So it was basically a new fort. They hadn't even finished building it. If you look at that, that's pretty impressive right there.
As the Federals strengthened Sumter, Confederate forces could be seen building batteries and mounting cannons along the harbor shore. 43 Southern cannon were trained on Fort Sumter, and more than 3,500 Confederate soldiers manned Charleston Harbor defense. Anderson was running low on provisions, and in January, a Federal relief ship left New York with supplies for Fort Sumter. When the Star of the West appeared at the entrance to Charleston Harbor, cadets from Charleston's elite Citadel Military Academy opened fire upon the unarmed ship. The Star of the West turned back without reaching the fort.
Okay, so this all happened. The Star of the West happened before Lincoln is even president. James Buchanan is president right now. This is where I say he just kicked the can down the road to the next president. I mean, here you have these Confederate forces. No war is declared, nothing, and they're already firing. They're firing at an unarmed ship that all it has is supplies. I don't even know if they had even demanded Buchanan to evacuate the island yet. I don't think they started asking for evacuation of Fort Sumter until Lincoln becomes president. So the Confederates were already wanting a war one way or the other, and Buchanan had a fish. Was a fish, basically. No backbone at all.
By April of 1861, Major Robert Anderson was in a tight fix. Confederates surrounded Fort Sumter and were expected to attack at any time. To avoid war, the Confederate government ordered General P.G.T. Beauregard to demand the evacuation of Fort Sumter, and if refused, to reduce it. His aides visited Fort Sumter twice under flag of truce and presented Anderson with the ultimatum, but without success. At 4:30 a.m. on April 12th, a shot fired from Fort Johnson on James Island burst over Fort Sumter and signaled the Confederate batteries in Charleston Harbor to commence an assault on the fort. The Civil War had begun. At daybreak, Union forces opened fire in response. Charlestonians watched as the bombardment of the fort continued for 34 hours. During the second day of the battle, artillery fire from Fort Moultrie set parts of Fort Sumter on fire. With so few men, Anderson could not fight the fire and the Confederates at the same time. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, arrangements were made for Anderson to surrender the fort. On April 14th, 1861, after a 50-gun salute to the U.S. flag, Anderson and his men withdrew to New York aboard a Union supply ship. Shortly after, Confederate forces occupied Fort Sumter, with photographers right behind. For the next 4 years, Fort Sumter became a symbol. For the South, it was sacred ground, where the first shot in the war for Southern independence was fired. For the North, Fort Sumter symbolized secession and disloyalty. U.S. Navy ships formed a blockade to keep Southern cargo vessels from using Charleston's port. On April 7, 1863, the war returned when 9 Federal gunboats attacked Fort Sumter and Fort Moultrie. After 2.5 hours, The artillery duel was over, leaving the Federals without their prize. For the next 20 months, Union forces bombarded Fort Sumter in an attempt to force surrender. They tried amphibious landings, but without success. Union attacks had a devastating effect upon Fort Sumter, with walls crumbling and cannons dismounted. By late 1863, it resembled a giant pile of rubble. Finally, as the war's end neared, Fort Sumter was evacuated. On April 14, 1865, Anderson came out of retirement to raise the U.S. flag once again over Fort Sumter. The war was over.
All right, so that's the Fort Sumter. Wow, so that thing just basically turned to rubble with so much firing on it. I wonder if it was the most fired upon fort in the Civil War. That's interesting. It went from being this nice, new, almost finished fort to just this pile of rubble after 4 years. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. That was some interesting details there at the end. Normally, right after the main battle Fort Sumter, you don't hear about Fort Sumter much after that. But amphibious landings on they try to land them, try to do some amphibious assaults. I mean, if you look at the beginning of Fort Sumter, it's just basically the walls rising up right out of the water. So I guess after a few bombardment and all that rubble, they could actually land soldiers on it to try to take it and climb up the rubble. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you for watching this, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and go ahead and leave a comment below about John Brown, or anything else that you might want to think of, or any other opinion you might have on why the Civil War started. Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.